Have you ever watched a Senate hearing where you could almost feel the tension building before anyone even raised their voice? That's exactly what happened in this exchange. I clicked on this expecting another routine COVID hearing. You know, the usual back and forth where politicians repeat talking points and everyone leaves with their minds unchanged. But then Senator Josh Hawley started asking questions about the origins of COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Francis Collins, and the now famous lab leak debate. Within seconds, you could tell this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. Hawley wasn't interested in long speeches. He was digging into emails, timelines, and conversations that have been controversial for years. As the witness tried to explain what happened inside the NIH, the room got noticeably more uncomfortable. Stay with me, because we're going to watch through what happened together, and by the end of this, I think you'll understand why this exchange has so many people talking again. Welcome back to the American Brief, where we cover the biggest political moments, break down what's really happening in Washington, and give you honest conservative commentary on the issues that matter most. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And after you watch this video, I want to hear your opinion in the comments because I have a feeling this one is going to spark a serious debate. All right, let's get into it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Dr. Wolanitz, if I could start with you. You served as the Chief of Staff to Francis Collins for 4 years, is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
From 2017 to 2021, is that correct?
Yes, that's
correct.
So
right through the heart of the pandemic.
Yes.
I noticed that Dr. Collins was intensely interested in discrediting the lab leak. I guess we'll call it a hypothesis. I think it's probably a little bit stronger than that now that we know something of what our intelligence agencies have long assessed. Last month, I had the chance to speak with Dr. Robert Gary, who sat right where you are, who co-authored that really, frankly, shameless propaganda piece, the Proximal Origin paper, which infamously stated that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. It went on to say it could not possibly have come from a lab. This, of course, we now know is not what multiple U.S. intelligence agencies assessed. What interests me is that your office was very involved in that paper, which was supposed to be an independent piece of scientific analysis, but Dr. Collins actually called Dr. Gary when he was supposedly working on the paper on February 1st, 2020. Is it normal for scientists who are supposedly doing independent research to get together and talk about how their conclusions are going to come out?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hawley. I think in general, yes, it is quite common for scientists across biomedical research fields, while they're in the process of doing research, to discuss with colleagues and other scientists. I do not believe that that is an accurate description of the conversations that took place.
Well, tell us, what were the nature of the conversations?
So, while I was not present for those conversations, my understanding based on readouts is there was a lot of interest in the origins and current understanding of SARS-CoV-2. And I think it's important when we're talking about the term lab leak theory to differentiate between the idea of a virus escaping from a lab, which is a biosafety violation, versus a virus that is engineered or manipulated in the lab and then escapes.
Yeah, and your boss and Dr. Fauci tried to discredit both of those things. They said that the lab was absolutely not involved. We know that at the time that this paper was supposedly being written, because we now have the private correspondence from Dr. Fauci, your boss said that it was a very destructive conspiracy to think that there was a lab involved. So he's on the phone with a scientist, quote-unquote scientist, who's supposedly writing an independent paper. By the way, Dr. Gary testified under oath that he was coming to his conclusions while this paper was being written. He was discovering the answers. But we now know that your boss was on the phone with him saying this is a very destructive conspiracy before the paper was even written. My question is, why was your office so intent on pushing to the public the idea that this could not possibly have been a lab issue? Is it because of the NIH's role in funding gain-of-function research at the lab? Is that the reason why?
So, Senator Hawley, I would say that in the event of any new and emerging infectious disease, if you've ever gone through a tabletop exercise in biosecurity,
Yeah. Answer my question. Is it because that NIH was actually helping to fund, EcoHealth was funding gain-of-function research?
No, I believe that's an inaccurate assessment.
In fact, your boss misled Congress and testified falsely that NIH and the EcoHealth had never conducted gain-of-function research at Wuhan, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
He did testify that.
I believe, sir, that what he testified to was that there was no evidence at that time that NIH was funding research that met the scope of the P3CO policy, which I want to differentiate from the term gain-of-function research,
of course,
which is a broader
this is the classic.
term.
This is the classic. Now that we've lied, now that you have, and your office, lied to the American people for years, told the American people that a lab leak was a very destructive conspiracy. That's your boss's statement while you were his chief of staff. Of course, we now know that that was the conspiracy to hide this from the American people, to censor people who went out and said, you know what, actually, maybe this is a lab leak. Your office, Dr. Fauci and others, tried to actively censor them. There was a propaganda effort that this paper was the center of, and now everybody says, well, we just weren't sure at the time. We didn't really know. You knew exactly what you were doing. You were actively misleading the American people the entire time. Get this, after that paper, it's really an opinion piece, was published, your boss then says to Dr. Fauci that he had really hoped that the paper would settle this. Is there anything more that we can do to shut down this destructive conspiracy? This is in April of 2020. And then Dr. Fauci went to the White House podium and said that absolutely there's no way that this could have come from a lab. Let me come back to my original question. Why was your office so intent on shutting down any talk about this being involved with a lab? Why? I don't understand it. Why the hysteria?
So, Senator Hawley, I will say that my understanding of the situation is that no one at NIH, including Dr. Collins, Dr. Fauci, myself, ever suggested that there wasn't the possibility that a virus had escaped from a lab.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Let me just stop you right there. I cannot have these lies just continue to be told over and over again. Sorry, and wrong. That's false. You people repeatedly said it could not have come from a lab. Your boss said it was a very destructive conspiracy. Not that it was unlikely, not that it was not the best idea, a conspiracy. And based on that, you censored, and your administration that you worked for actively censored scientists, journalists. And what we now know is our own intelligence agencies at the same time were concluding and briefing members of Congress that it likely was from a lab leak. I mean, it's extraordinary. And now you've been caught red-handed because you thought that the rest of us wouldn't find out. You thought that the public would always be kept in the dark. And as it turns out, we now know these emails have become public that you were pushing this propaganda effort and yet claiming the mantle of science. Don't you see that what you have done has set back the respectability and integrity of science by generations? You were acting as propagandists. Do you regret your role in any of this?
So, Senator Hawley, I don't think you've characterized
Do you
my
regret your role in
of
any of the
NIH.
misleading of the public? Do you regret your role in your office saying that a lab nexus here is a very destructive conspiracy? Do you regret your role in helping censor millions of Americans who were kicked off social media, who were disciplined at work for saying that maybe a lab was involved, which we now know the FBI thinks is the case? Do you regret it?
I do not believe I ever had the role that you're describing.
Do you regret anything that you did during this period? Do you regret not speaking out? Do you regret not advising your boss to temper his comments? Do you regret not opposing the censorship? Do you regret it? You're in a position of tremendous influence.
I do not believe censorship took place, sir.
You don't believe censorship took place?
I do not.
What world are you living in? Tell that to the scientists who basically lost their credentials. Tell that to the people who were kicked off of social media and banned because they asked about a lab leak. You don't believe censorship took place? The privilege is astounding. You were the chief of staff at the NIH pushing these conspiracies, pushing the effort to shut down Americans, and now you have the gall to sit here and say censorship never took place. I mean, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Senator,
I cannot believe that that's your testimony. And frankly, I can't believe you have the gall to sit here and say that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Senator Peters, may I have a chance to expand on my comments for a moment?
If you could be brief, please. We have other questions.
Yes, thank you. I think I want to make it very clear that I certainly, and I do believe this is true of others at NIH as well, including Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci, have never dismissed that the potential origins of SARS-CoV-2 leading to the COVID-19 pandemic are known, that there is that we just don't have the evidence to be able to make a determination.
That's what the paper said. The paper said it couldn't have come from a lab. It could not have come from a lab. Your boss said it was a very destructive conspiracy. But I
please let her finish.
I'd like to go forward with my questions, please.
So the hearing starts with Senator Josh Hawley directing his questions to Dr. Jorgenson Wan, who served as Dr. Francis Collins' chief of staff during the heart of the COVID-19 pandemic. Right away, Hawley establishes something important. He's reminding everyone that she wasn't some outside observer. She wasn't reading about these decisions years later like the rest of us. She worked directly under Francis Collins from 2017 through 2021, which means she was sitting inside one of the most influential public health agencies during one of the biggest crises in modern history. Immediately, Hawley pivots to the issue that's haunted public health officials for years now, the lab leak theory. Now, let's remember something. Back in early 2020, if you even suggested COVID might have originated from a laboratory accident, many people acted as though you were spreading misinformation. Social media companies flagged posts. News organizations dismissed the idea. Experts appeared on television saying it was basically impossible. Today, the conversation looks very different. Multiple U.S. agencies have publicly said a laboratory origin is at least a plausible explanation, even if there isn't unanimous agreement. That's what makes this hearing so fascinating. Hawley brings up the now infamous Proximal Origin paper, a publication that argued COVID-19 was not engineered and strongly favored a natural origin. He points out that Dr. Robert Gary, one of the paper's authors, previously testified before the committee. Hawley's argument is straightforward. If this paper was supposed to be an independent scientific analysis, why were top NIH officials discussing the issue with the scientists before the paper was even completed? That's the heart of his questioning. The witness responds by saying scientists routinely discuss research with one another. On the surface, that's true. Collaboration is a normal part of science. Researchers constantly exchange ideas, debate evidence, and critique each other's work. But Hawley clearly isn't satisfied. He asks what those conversations were actually about. And here's where you can almost feel him getting more frustrated with every answer. The witness explains that discussions focused on understanding the virus and distinguishing between different possibilities, whether the virus accidentally escaped from a laboratory or whether it had been deliberately engineered. Now, that's an important distinction. A laboratory leak doesn't necessarily mean the virus was created in a lab. It could refer to a naturally collected virus escaping because of a safety failure. Those are different claims. But Hawley's response is immediate. He argues that Collins and Fauci publicly worked to discredit both possibilities. He references emails in which Francis Collins described discussion of a lab origin as a very destructive conspiracy. Hawley suggests these statements came before the scientific paper was finalized, raising questions about whether officials had already settled on a public narrative. Watching this unfold, I found myself thinking about something bigger than politics. Science is supposed to invite questions. Good science doesn't fear debate. If your conclusions are strong, they should survive scrutiny. One of the biggest mistakes made during COVID wasn't simply getting something wrong. It's that too many people acted as though asking questions itself was dangerous. That damaged public trust. And once public trust is broken, rebuilding it becomes incredibly difficult. Hawley then shifts toward NIH funding. He asks whether the government's role in supporting eco-health alliances work, including research involving coronaviruses, influenced officials' desire to dismiss the lab leak hypothesis. The witness rejects that suggestion. She says Hawley's characterization is inaccurate. Then Hawley brings up something conservatives have discussed for years: gain-of-function research. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with that phrase, it's been one of the most controversial issues in biomedical research. Different experts define it differently, which has only fueled confusion. The witness argues that the research in question didn't meet the federal definition used under the government's oversight framework. Hawley isn't buying it. He accuses Collins of misleading Congress about NIH funding connected to coronavirus research. At this point, the exchange stops feeling like a simple policy disagreement. It becomes a dispute over credibility itself. And honestly, that's what stood out to me the most. This isn't simply about where COVID came from anymore. It's about whether government officials were fully transparent with the American people during one of the biggest emergencies in our nation's history. Then Hawley says something that I think resonates with millions of Americans. He accuses officials of telling the public for years that a lab leak was merely a conspiracy theory, only to gradually soften that position as more information became public. Whether someone ultimately believes the virus originated naturally or from a laboratory, it's undeniable that public discussion evolved dramatically over time. Questions once dismissed eventually became legitimate topics of investigation. That's simply where we are today. The hearing gets even more intense when Hawley references emails between Collins and Fauci after the publication of the Proximal Origin paper. According to Hawley's interpretation, Collins hoped the paper would put the lab leak discussion to rest. Hawley argues that officials weren't merely presenting scientific evidence. They were actively trying to shape public opinion. The witness disagrees with that characterization. She says NIH officials never claimed a laboratory accident was impossible. And that's where Hawley completely loses patience. You can hear it in his voice. He interrupts and says he can't allow what he views as false statements to continue. This is the moment everyone watching probably leaned closer to their screen. Because now this isn't just policy. It's confrontation. Hawley accuses NIH leadership of repeatedly labeling the lab leak idea as a conspiracy while intelligence agencies were simultaneously considering it a credible possibility. He argues that Americans who raise questions faced censorship online and professional consequences in their careers. Now, here's my perspective. Conservatives have long argued that the biggest issue wasn't simply whether the lab leak theory proved correct. It was whether powerful institutions discouraged legitimate debate. Healthy democracies require open discussion. Science advances by testing ideas, not banning them. At the same time, it's also fair to acknowledge that during the earliest days of the pandemic, officials were working with incomplete information in an unprecedented global emergency. Decisions were made under enormous pressure, and not every early conclusion was necessarily intended to deceive. That context matters too. Where people continue to disagree is whether officials merely got things wrong or whether they knowingly tried to steer public opinion beyond what the available evidence justified. That's exactly what this hearing is trying to explore. Then Hawley delivers one of the strongest lines of the exchange. He argues that actions by public health leadership have damaged the credibility of science itself for an entire generation. That's a serious accusation. Whether you agree or disagree with him, it reflects something polls have consistently shown over recent years. Public trust in major institutions has declined significantly, and trust is hard to rebuild. The witness repeatedly says she doesn't accept Hawley's description of events. She says she doesn't believe censorship occurred. When she says that, Hawley reacts immediately. He points to scientists who say they face professional consequences. He mentions people removed from social media platforms after discussing the lab leak theory. He says millions of Americans experience suppression of debate. Now, it's important to separate two different issues here. Government officials making public statements is one issue. Private companies moderating content is another. Questions about coordination between government officials and technology companies have been the subject of lawsuits, investigations, and continuing public debate. Reasonable people disagree about how much influence government officials exercised over online moderation. That's still an active area of discussion. As the hearing wraps up, the witness asks for an opportunity to clarify her testimony. She says neither she, Dr. Collins, nor Dr. Fauci ever dismissed the possibility that the origins of COVID remained uncertain. Hawley quickly pushes back again, pointing to the wording of the scientific paper and previous public comments. And just like that, the exchange ends. Walking away from this hearing, one thing stood out above everything else. Americans deserve transparency. Whether you're conservative, liberal, or somewhere in the middle, public confidence depends on honest communication. If officials know something, they should say it. If they don't know, they should say that too. Uncertainty isn't weakness. Pretending certainty where it doesn't exist is. This hearing wasn't really about replaying the arguments of 2020. It was about accountability in 2026. It's about asking whether institutions learned anything from one of the most consequential public health crises in American history. Those are questions worth asking regardless of party. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Senator Hawley raised legitimate concerns about transparency and public trust? Or do you think NIH officials have been unfairly criticized for decisions made during an unprecedented emergency? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the American Brief, and share this with someone who wants to stay informed about what's happening in Washington. Thanks for watching. God bless you. God bless America. And I'll see you in the next video.